little heaven down here. I would like to welcome everyone, children, young and old, to our first night of our Diving Deep into God's Word Vacation Bible School. And you might have noticed that this auditorium doesn't look like a normal auditorium. Did anybody see that they might have walked into something coming in here? Hey, what did you see when you walked in? A big old fish. We're inside of a big old fish tonight. And so you might see some seaweed hanging, and I see some dead fish if you look up. I'm glad it doesn't smell like a dead fish, though. That'd be real stinky, wouldn't it? That'd be real. Oh, there's one. And there's also somebody else behind me, and we might learn a little bit about that later. But first, we're going to sing a few songs. Yeah. All right, let's all sing. Will you be a friend of mine, friend of mine, friend of mine? Will you be a friend of mine? Shake my hand today. Yes, I'll be a friend of yours, friend of yours, friend of yours. Yes, I'll be a friend of yours and shake your hand today. Oh yeah, we don't have this one. I got this one. We're going to sing a song about, now this song is about catching raindrops in your mouth. So let's stand up because you can't catch raindrops without having to move around a little bit. And since we're inside of a big old fish, I bet these raindrops don't taste very good, but we'll sing it anyway. If all the raindrops were lemon drops and gumdrops, so what a wonderful world it would be. I'd go outside with my mouth open wide. If all the raindrops were lemon drops and gumdrops, oh what a wonderful world it would be. If all the snowflakes were ice cream and milkshakes, oh what a wonderful world it would be. I'd go outside with my mouth open wide. If all the snowflakes were ice cream and milkshakes, oh what a wonderful world it would be. If all the people in the world were Christians, oh what a wonderful world it would be. I go outside with my arms open wide. If all the people in the world were Christians, oh what a wonderful world it would be. All right, and I think you might have the next one. Well, he promised me love, and he done it. Well, he promised me love, and he done it. Well, he promised me love, and he done what he said he'd do. My Lord, he done it, my Lord. He done it, my Lord. He done what he said he'd do. Well, he promised me joy, and he done it. Well, he promised me joy, and he done it. Well, he promised me joy, and he done what he said he'd do. My Lord, he done it, my Lord. He done it, my Lord. He done what he said he'd do. Well, he promised me peace, and he done it. Well, he promised me peace, and he done it. Well, he promised me peace, and he done what he said he'd do. My Lord, he done it, my Lord. He done it, my Lord. He done what he said he'd do. All right, I'm going to get everybody to take a seat. And we're going to have to put on our listening ears and get our watching eyes out because we're about to watch a short little video. Y'all ready for it? All right, let's watch.
Heroes of the Bible, Jonah. This is Jonah. Jonah was a prophet. That means it was his job to tell people what God told him to say.
Yep.
One day, God told Jonah to go to Nineveh because the people of Nineveh were doing bad things. But instead, Jonah ran away. And went to the port to board a ship, going the other way. He was hoping to get away from God. He sailed for a place called Tarshish. While he was at sea, God sent a great and powerful wind over the sea that caused a storm that seemed like it would break the ship apart. Fearing for their lives, the sailors tried everything they could think of to save the ship. Meanwhile, Jonah was sound asleep, so the captain went down and said, "How can you sleep at a time like this? Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will help us." Then the crew figured out that Jonah was the reason for the storm. And they asked him, "Who are you? Why is this happening to us?" Jonah told them who he was and that he worshipped the one true God who made the sea. Then he told the sailors to throw him in the sea so the storm would stop.
No, why?
The sailors still tried to escape the storm, but it was no use. So they asked God for forgiveness and threw Jonah into the sea. The storm stopped at once.
Whoa!
The sailors were amazed at God's power and they vowed to serve him. Now God sent a great fish to swallow Jonah.
Great.
And Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and nights. Jonah prayed to God from inside the fish, and God ordered the fish to spit Jonah out.
Yuck.
God told Jonah again to go to the city of Nineveh to tell them what God had said about them.
I get it.
This time, Jonah obeyed God and went to Nineveh to deliver God's message. The people of Nineveh stopped doing bad things and turned to God. They were saved because they listened to the message that God had given Jonah.
So all this week we're going to be learning stories about some people in the Bible. Some of these lessons that we're going to be learning about involve people getting maybe ankle deep, some of them will get chest deep, and some of them will get completely immersed in some body of water. Now what happened to this guy? He got thrown in that water and he got completely submerged, and then he got swallowed by a big old fish. And we're going to be learning a lot more about that story tonight in all of our classes, and we'll have some puppet shows, and it'll be really, really, really fun. I think we've got maybe a couple more songs that we're going to sing. Y'all ready? I can listen to my Jesus. I can learn to pray. I can learn to love my neighbor each and every day. Jesus has given me the answer. If I only look, all I need to know to love Him is written in His book. It's written in His book. If I only look, all I need to know is in His book. It's written in His book. If I only look, everything is in His book. I can listen to my Jesus. I can learn to love. I can learn to love another. Help comes from up above. Jesus has given me the answer. If I only look, all I need to know to love Him is written in His book. It's written in His book. If I only look, all I need to know is in His book. It's written in His book. If I only look, everything is in His book. I think we got one more, and then we might sing another one. I much, and we need to move around just a little bit, so we'll sing a stand-up song now. It isn't any trouble just to have somebody. It isn't any trouble just to have somebody. If ever you're in trouble, it will vanish like a bubble. If you only take the trouble just to have somebody. It isn't any trouble just to be alright while pray. It isn't any trouble just to be alright while pray. If ever you're in trouble, it will vanish like a bubble. If you only take the trouble just to be alright while praying. It isn't any trouble just to have angels sing. It isn't any trouble just to have angels sing. If ever you're in trouble, it will vanish like a bubble. If you only take the trouble just to have angels sing. Alright, let's stand up. Everybody. Let's see. I think we will start marching. Can we march? I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly over the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly for the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. Let's see. Think we can do the cowboy version? All right, let's see if we can do it. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly for the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yeehaw! I'm in the Lord's army. Yeehaw! I'm in the Lord's army. Yeehaw! I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly for the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yeehaw! All right. I think it is about that time. We're going to figure out where everybody is going. Let me put my list up here. And I think we're going to let the 2s and 3s class go first. And y'all will be going to Bible class. So that's the first one on the left when you walk into the, it's kind of like an underwater cave. All right. Get them 2s and 3s going. Next, we will get our pre-K and kindergarten going on down, and y'all be going to crafts first. Y'all go just a little bit past where they're going. And the first through third grade is going where I want to go. Y'all are going to snacks first. How fair is that? Y'all get to eat before me? Alright, y'all go ahead. Y'all got to go through that underwater cave. Y'all be careful. And then the 4th through 6th grade will follow me and Ethan, and we'll go to the puppet room. And y'all can take care of business.
evening, everybody. Glad y'all are here. As you've noticed, things look a little different tonight, and that's okay. I like it. Kind of puts us in the mood. It's a festive time with VBS, Vacation Bible School, and the kids are enjoying it, and it's very encouraging to have so many adults here. Not everybody has classes for adults, and I'm thankful that our elders a long time ago decided, hey, we need something for the grown-ups too. They don't just drop the kids off and go watch TV. They can stay here and learn too. So we're going to do that tonight. As you saw from the video, we're studying Jonah tonight, so that's what we'll be studying in here. And in preparation for this, I've got the Bible on audio disc, and I said, well, okay, I'll just play that on my way home and listen to the whole book of Jonah on my way home from work. Well, I start listening, and next thing you know, Micah, chapter 1. It's already over? All right, let's back it up, and I'll play it again. Next thing you know, Micah, chapter 1. 3 times I heard it on my way home from work, and still wasn't home yet. Jonah is a short book. The chapters are short. There's only four of them, and the action just one right after another. There's lots and lots of details that are left out that sometimes we would like to know, but that's okay. God's given us plenty of good details that are interesting and are beneficial to us, so we'll be looking at those tonight. Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. Does our evil come up before God? Yours and mine. The things we do, our sins, do they come up before God? Yeah, they do. When we sin against God, when we sin against others, we look back at Cain and Abel. The voice of your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. Injustice cries out to God. That's powerful. God has a connection to us that we don't understand. We really can't grasp. I can't grasp. Maybe you've got it down pat, but I can't get it. He is connected to us in ways that I don't even know about. When we sin against each other, we're sinning against God. In every one of our relationships, I've seen this explained with the marriage vows, that it's a triangle. The husband and the wife are joined here, but they're also joined to God, and it's a triangle. And drawing closer to each other makes that triangle smaller, and you're drawing closer to God. Or if you're trying to draw closer to God, it'll draw you closer together. It's just how it works with a triangle. But it's like that with everybody. God created all men. And we are all His children. Now, some are faithful children and some are unfaithful, rebellious children. But we're all His children. So when I sin against Rick, God gets mad because Rick's His kid. People get upset when you do something to their kid. Go to the baseball field and you'll find out real quick. Parents get upset when somebody gets on to their kid. God is that way. He cares about each one of us. And so when I sin against you, I'm sinning against God. Joseph said as much when he's approached by Potiphar's wife. He says, how can I do this great evil? How can I sin against God? And I'm sure she was thinking, well, who was asking God to be part of this? It was just me and you. But Joseph understood God's part of everything. And so sinning against breaking his law certainly is sinning against God, but sinning against each other is sinning against God as well. Now, this same Jonah that we're talking about here is the same one that prophesied to the king of Israel, Jeroboam II. He was the son of Joash. He prophesied that the border of Israel would be restored because it had been encroached upon. And it was. We find that in 2 Kings chapter 14, verses 23 through 27. Jeroboam II was king from 784 to 741 BC. And this is when the Assyrians first invade Israel, the northern tribes, because they've already split, the divided kingdom. So the Assyrians are coming in and they're attacking the northern kingdom, Israel. Less than 20 years later, the northern kingdom would be conquered and carried off into captivity. This is right at the end of the northern tribes, the nation of Israel. They would be carried off into captivity, never to return. But before all that happened, Jonah is called to go and preach to these Assyrians. He doesn't want to. Instead, he goes to Tarshish, or tries to. He's going in the opposite direction. And as far in the opposite direction as you can go. You got the Mediterranean Sea and Israel's over here. He's getting on a boat to go all the way out here to the ocean, to the Atlantic Ocean. He's trying to get as far away from where he's supposed to go as he can. Why? This is God telling him where to go, what he needs to do. He's a prophet. He knows how things work. We've already seen from 2 Kings that he knows who God is. Verse 3 tells us he wanted to flee from the presence of the Lord. Twice in that verse it says that, flee from the presence of the Lord. Now how is that possible? God's everywhere, right? Yeah. They had a different view of God at that time. God was in Israel because he was their God and they were his people, sort of. They've drifted far afield from that, but that was the thinking. That was the mindset. And so all he's got to do is get away from Israel. That's where they worshiped. That was the land of the promise. God's chosen people were there, and he was nowhere else. He wasn't with the enemies. He was with them. They were worshiping idols and all these kinds of crazy things. So that's where God was. For the longest, that was where the mercy seat was. Now, this is after the split, and you got the temple down in Judah, but still, in their mindset, it's all right there in Israel. So he's trying to get away from God. Verse 4, it just gets right into that. 4 verses in, and we got the storm. The Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea. That's the English Standard Version. I like that. He hurled a great wind. This was not a mild thing, and it was very abrupt. It was powerful, and it got everybody's attention. All hands on deck. Each person cried out to his God. So we see the type of people that were on this boat. It was Gentiles. It was people from other nations. Some of them were sailors, some of them were merchants, some of them were just passengers like Jonah. We don't know how many there were, but there were other people on this boat besides Jonah. And they were crying out to their gods. And that's so many times that's hard for me to imagine this idea that, I worship this God that does this and this God that does that and all these things. And there might be a God of the seas that I would worship, and there might be a God of the sky and the storms and the weather that I would worship and make sacrifices to, and all these things. That's kind of foreign to me. but it's not completely foreign. Many around us pray to the patron saint of travelers, or the patron saint of boatmen, or fishermen, or mariners and navigators, or merchants, or sailors, and there's many more. Each one of those has a patron saint attached to them. And there are people who pray to those things, and they'll keep a card picture of them and kiss it or pray to it or whatever in hopes of good travel. Now, that's foreign to Scripture. Scripture, we pray to God the Father through Jesus, not to anybody else. But it is familiar, at least to us, that people, even in our day, do these similar kinds of things. So that's what they were doing on the deck. Jonah is fast asleep. The captain comes down and wakes him up. "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish." They've exhausted all their other options. There's one guy left. Maybe his God can do something. They cast lots, and the lots point to Jonah. I wonder how that happened. Was that just the luck of the draw, the roll of the dice, like in the video there? No. God made those lots, whatever they were, point to Jonah. He's in control of all this. It's not chance, it's not luck, and it's not random. So they question him. There's something very interesting. Jonah proclaims like a prophet would. He says, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the seas and the dry land." That's what a prophet would say. But that's not how he's been acting. He's been running and hiding and defying this God. But he says here, "This is the one that I fear." So he fears him enough to run away from him, but he doesn't fear him enough to obey him. We see that a lot in our world today, that people fear God, they fear judgment, but it's not enough to motivate them to action, to do what is necessary to be saved, to be free from their guilt, from their sin, from the destruction that's coming. It's odd to me that a prophet would be in that position, but prophets were people just like us. They were just chosen by God for special purposes, to present His word, His message to the people. He told them he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord. And I love their reaction. "What have you done? What have you done? He told you to go do this, and you tried to flee from him." Then they followed up, "Well, what can we do to appease your God?" They're buying into this. I mean, they're believing in all these gods and all this kind of stuff. So one more is no big deal for them to believe in. And so they're, "Hey, what can we do? You've obviously angered your God. What can we do to save our lives, to spare us?" He says something interesting. "Pick me up and throw me overboard." Why didn't he just jump? If he was the problem, why didn't he just jump overboard? Instead, he tells them, "You pick me up and you throw me overboard." I don't know. Maybe it's the way of the prophet. The prophet is to bring the message to you and force you to do something with it. Naaman called to wash in the Jordan River 7 times. Could Elijah have just healed him right then and there? Sure. But no, you got to go do something. So maybe it's just the way of the prophet. You got to do something. I don't think so in this case, because these travelers, these sailors, are not the ones that Jonah was sent to. They're just caught up in his mischief. Some suggest that jumping would have been suicide and was against the law of Moses. So he calls on them to throw him. So he doesn't commit the sin, they do. Maybe. We're going to discuss this a little bit more at the end. Maybe a little different angle, but kind of building on that. Well, they didn't want to. They didn't want to throw him overboard. They tried everything they could to avoid it. They started throwing merchandise overboard, trying to lighten the load. They rowed harder, trying to outrun the storm or move out of it. Nothing worked. And then they cry out to God. Possibly the very first time they've ever spoken to the one true God. "O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." Basically, they're saying, God, you put us in this place, so don't hold it against us. That's a fair remark. They're asking. They seem to be very, they don't seem flippant about it. They seem sincere. Please don't hold this against us. Don't punish us because what we're about to do. You've brought this on, and your prophet has told us as much. So don't hold it against us. They threw him in. And guess what? Calm seas instantly. They knew they had done the right thing right then. This caused them to fear the Lord because they knew how fast the storm came up. They knew the reason, or at least what they were told the reason was, and then as soon as they dispensed with Jonah, storm's over. They have seen true power. None of this stuff that they've been brought up, oh, if you will just pray to this little stone idol and keep it in your bedroom, then all these things will happen, and, bring it food and all these things. None of that stuff, all the fake stuff that they've been living with all their life, they've finally seen the real thing. We did it, and there was no delay. It just happened. Impossible things. Their gods couldn't stop a storm like that. They feared the Lord, they offered sacrifice, and they made vows. Now, I don't know if they really kept the vows. People do things in the heat of the moment, and they really, from what little we're given, they really didn't know very much about this God. They were going to Tarshish, far, far away from Israel, where they could presumably find out more about this God. But they made vows, they offered sacrifice, they showed their appreciation, their thanks, and they knew they had been in the presence of true deity. This reminds me of Jesus being asleep during the storm in Mark chapter 4, verses 37 and 39. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him and said, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?" Just like the captain did to Jonah. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. The wind listens to God. The wind listened to Jesus. And it obeyed, unlike his prophet. Now, here's Jonah. He's stuck in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, presumably miles from shore. Jonah has given up and accepted his fate of death. God is angry with him, and he's been thrown overboard. He's going to drown. There's no way he can swim that far. There's no other boats for him to get on, and they're not going to let him back on because, hey, we got rid of you once and everything got smooth. We're not going to let you back on here. Your God will be angry. He'll be furious with us. So how's he going to get back to shore? God provides. And again, I don't know that he really thought about getting back to shore. He was just going to drown in the middle of the sea, and that was it. But God had a plan. He prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah. And you can debate whether it's fish or whale or whatever. I don't have a problem either way with it. They didn't classify animals the same way we do. When Moses is listing birds, he includes bats. Now, our scheme that we have today doesn't include bats in with the birds. Bats are mammals. Well, Moses didn't make the distinction there, so I don't know that he would have made a distinction between whale and fish or whatever. I'm good either way. But he didn't create a new fish. The Hebrew word here is M-A-N-A, manna, I guess. I have to be careful because I keep thinking about manna that they ate in the wilderness. But M-A-N-A, which means to count or reckon or number or assign or tell or appoint or prepare. So very different words than create, make anew. So this was an existing fish or whale at that time, and may still be an existing type of whale or fish today. It could still be roaming the seas, and people have made various guesses about, well, which kind of animal could that be, and all this. But he chose a fish. He prepared a fish. He told the fish, go over there, swallow him up. And he did. Now, I've seen lots of drawings about how this was. You know, sometimes it's a huge cavern, maybe not quite this big, but huge cavern, and he's up walking around inside the fish or the whale. I think I even saw one where he had a campfire set up, and I don't know how you set up a campfire inside a fish, but anyway. People have different ideas, and maybe that was just for kids to kind of have a little fun, but so it could have been cavernous, or it could have been like a sleeping bag. I mean, just like all around him. He just no room to wiggle, no room to do much of nothing. We don't know how big the fish was, but it's interesting to think about. You know, how did he breathe? You know, well, it was a whale, so he went up to the surface and took in air, and it got it in there. Well, maybe air goes into the lungs, or, you know, I don't know. I don't know how all that worked. I don't need to know. God knows. God shut the lion's mouth, and I don't know how he done that. God kept 3 Hebrews from burning up in a fiery furnace that killed the guards that threw them in there. I don't know how he done that. God raised people from the dead. Sure don't know how he done that. God made a donkey talk. I'd like to see that one. So, God took care of it. Maybe he didn't need to breathe the whole time. We studied a couple weeks ago when Moses was up on the mountain. Fasted, no food or water for 40 days. And we can't do that naturally. That was a miracle. Maybe Jonah didn't need to breathe. I don't know how he done it, but God handled it. He was in there for 3 days and 3 nights. I don't know why that is. That's a long time. Maybe he was that far from the shore where the whale fish was going to spit him out. Or maybe God had that fish doing laps. All right, we're going, hey, no, 1 day's not enough. Make another lap. 2 days, no, 3 laps. You know, it kept him in there. Why? We need to suffer. when we do things wrong, when we hit bottom, sometimes we have to stay there a little bit, and soak it in and feel it. What have we really done? So it may have been that he was letting Jonah stew a little bit. It could also have been he was that far across the sea, and it took 3 days and 3 nights to get him back to where he started from. We don't know where he ended up. He was just on the shore. Maybe took him all the way back to Joppa, to the last place he was on land. Or could have just took it to the first closest piece of land. I don't know. But nonetheless, he was out here in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and God provided him safe passage back to shore so he could get back on his own feet and do what he's supposed to do. Jonah prays, and we see his repentance and his appreciative heart. And when you're reading through there, right after that is where God tells the fish to spit him out on the shore. It may have taken 3 days for him to come to his senses. I kind of doubt it, for him to pray this prayer, but it just follows right after that. So maybe he was just that stubborn. Maybe I don't know. 3 days and 3 nights, and God tells the fish, spit him out. Once again, the fish obeys God. When God appointed the fish, hey, you go do it. He did. Swallowed him up, carried him where he wanted him, spit him out. He done it. So God speaks to the fish and spits Jonah out on dry land in chapter 2, verse 10. Jonah is safe. He thought he was dead. Now he is safe. Now the men on the boat don't know that. Philip mentioned this to me the other night. That I never even thought about that. The guys that threw him overboard, last they saw, he was drowning in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Maybe they saw the fish swallow him up. Well, that just as dead. They had this on their conscience, or at least would have thought about it. Now maybe that's why they were, they were praying. They were offering sacrifice. Please don't hold this against us. But they had to think about it for the rest of their life. You remember that guy? We had to kill him. We was all going to die. Jonah gets called again, and he has a different response this time. God tells him the same words, arise and go to Nineveh. This time he does. Now, Nineveh is a huge city. It takes 3 days to walk across it. It'd probably take me 7. But normal people walking, 3 days to walk across it. Jonah goes 1 day's journey in and starts preaching. What does he preach? 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Now, I'm sure he said a lot more words, but that's the message God gave him, and that's what we're told he preached. The hearers are sorrowful. They proclaim a fast. They put on sackcloth, every one. This is before the king even hears about it. When the king hears about it, he makes a proclamation for everybody else to do the same thing. He takes off his robe and puts on sackcloth. He sits in ashes. There's not many kings that would do that just from somebody coming and telling them, hey, God's going to destroy your city. Oh, yeah? You seen our walls? We're fine. What is it about this timing that causes them to, all the people, not just 1 or 2 outliers, but everybody, to accept this? I've heard that, or read where people said they were under great distress. Things were falling apart for them. They've been had some very severe, hard times, and they were looking. That seems to fall in line. Even today, where there are people who are on severe, hard times, and when they hear the good news of the gospel, they respond. When things are going great, you don't get very much response. It's when we've tried everything else, nothing else is working, everything I've done has brought calamity. Give me something else. And I think that that's where these people were, based on the response that's given. And it's interesting that the king tells the people, cry mightily to the Lord, not to their false gods, not the ones they've been worshiping. They've been worshiping idols, just like all the other nations had, and even Israel had been doing. Cry mightily to the Lord, let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent from this fierce anger so that we may not perish. It looks like it was their idea that maybe we can change God's mind. Because that's not what we have recorded that Jonah preached. He said 40 days and that's it. And he's probably excited about that part of it, as we'll find out. But they seem to come up with this idea, well, if we'll change, maybe God will change his mind. That shows godly sorrow. They were repentant. And it worked. I don't know how they found out that it worked. My guess is Jonah had to tell them, God has seen your sorrow, your repentance, and he's not going to do the 40-day destruction. And I'm sure, boy, I just ate him alive to have to tell them that. I don't know how long it took him. Did Jonah wait till the last day and say, all right, God's changed his mind? Did they have 40 days of this fasting and this sorrow? I don't know. May have had 3 days like Jonah did. I don't know how long it was. But it was long enough to prove that, hey, we're not just trying this, we're sincere. And God was touched. He had compassion on them. Chapter 4, Jonah is exceedingly angry at God. Why? He prayed these words to God, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarsus, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. We see from this that Jonah had tried to dissuade God from sending him to Nineveh. From the very beginning, before he ever went down to Joppa, he tried to talk God out of it because he knew what the result would be. It goes back to that timing. I think Jonah had an idea that these people would be receptive, and he didn't want them to be. And the thing is, it turned out worse than he ever even thought. They all repented. I mean, he maybe thought, okay, well, some of them, no. From the king on down, they were the enemy. Not only were they Gentiles and idol worshippers, they would end up being the instrument that God used to wipe out Israel's northern tribes. Andy mentioned in his sermon this morning, when Paul is giving his defense, his apology to the Jewish crowd in Jerusalem, they were quiet until they mentioned that God sent him to go and speak to the Gentiles, to preach to them. Then it was over. They erupted. The very mention of God blessing Gentiles, helping Gentiles. Now I realize there are 700 years between Paul and Jonah. But as you go back through and you read the Old Testament, you do kind of get that idea that this was a long-running theme that passed down from generation to generation to generation. We're the chosen people and everybody else is trash, garbage. He goes on at the end of it, he says, it's better for me to die than to live. Why would he say that? I mean, he knows what death is. He's faced it not too many days before this. It's better. It seems kind of, that's just, he goes back to this phrase a lot. Why is it better for him to die? Well, how can he face his countrymen and his family and his king after helping the enemy? God was going to destroy their enemy for them. And all he had to do is not tell them. Go in the opposite direction. He was performing a national service to Israel. But that was not God's plan. It's not what God told him to do. But now he's got to go back and face these people. Oh, our enemy, God was going to destroy them, but I went and talked to them and preached, and guess what? God forgave them, and he's going to bless them, and they're going to come destroy us. You don't have to pay me now. You can pay me later. No, that's not the reception. He would have, death was coming his way one way or another is probably how he saw it. He says all of this prayer to God, before he even leaves the city. I mean, he's got these Ninevite Gentiles around him, and he's praying to God, just take me now. I knew you would forgive them, and you did, and, what a guy, what a guy. God says, do you do well to be angry? Jonah doesn't answer. This, to me, is similar to a parable that Jesus told about workers hired at various times of the day, even in the 11th hour, but they all get paid the same. Matthew 20, verse 15 says, the master of the house says, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? I think Jonah begrudged God's generosity, his forgiveness. He was angry at God. And God's telling him, that's not your place. Jonah leaves the city, makes a booth, and sits in the shade to see what will happen to the city. But the booth apparently wasn't enough shade for him. It's really hot and all this. It wasn't enough. God has not given up on Jonah yet. God appoints, same word that was applied to the fish. God appoints a plant to grow quickly and cover Jonah. Springs up overnight. Jonah is exceedingly glad he's living in the shade now. He got things, he feels better. The next day, God appoints a worm, same word, to attack the plant, and it withered. Then the sun rises, and God appoints, same word, a scorching east wind to come and blow this hot air all over Jonah. And the sun beats down on his head so that he grows faint. Again, he cries, it's better for me to die than to live. God says, do you well to be angry for the plant? This time Jonah does answer. Yes, he's had enough. Yes, I do well to be angry enough to die. He's had his breaking point. He's had all he can stand. And he's talking back to God directly. He's not hiding in the shadows and sneaking across a different direction. He's confronting God. Yes, I'm angry enough to die. Then we get the lesson that Jonah needed to learn. And the Lord said, you pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left? He's telling you to get your priorities straight. Figure out what's more important. Put your ideas of things aside and learn what's really important. Jesus said, "For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul?" One soul is worth all the treasure in the world. And here are 120,000 souls. And just like Jonah is, these are all descendants of Adam and Eve, just like you and I. They were created by God. Adam and Eve were created by God, and we are all descendants of them. God cares about them, and so should Jonah. Now, some of y'all have noticed I left off 4 words, the last 4 words of the book of Jonah. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? God just kind of snicks that right on the end of it. And also much cattle. What? God's concerned about the cattle? He's talking about the souls. Cattle don't have souls. What's going on? Maybe it should have been, they don't know their right hand from their left, like so much cattle. Cattle don't know what's going on. These people didn't know what's going on. Like so much cattle. I don't think so. I've looked at over a dozen different translations. None of them say that. They all say either and much cattle, or and much livestock, or and many animals. So the translation doesn't go in that direction. Well, maybe God was deriding Jonah and saying, well, if you don't care about the people, maybe you should at least care about the animals. It's a lot of wealth there, What about the poor animal? Boy, in our world today, it's all about the animals. We'll save a puppy dog over our kid sometime. It's almost to that point. Animals. So maybe that was Jonah's thing, and God's kind of giving him down the road about it. I don't think so either. Maybe God was truly concerned about the animals themselves, not for Jonah's sake, but for his. Man is God's crowning creation. He was the pinnacle, and we have souls, and he cares, and he does all this for us. But he created animals too, and said it was good when he created them. He cares about his creation. God required animals to be sacrificed for the atonement for man's sins until the perfect sacrifice could be made. He had used animals to accomplish his plan for Jonah, the fish, the worm, and even the plant. Luke 12:6 says, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? And not one of them is forgotten by God." God values his creation. I don't know which one of those is the right answer, and it may not be any of those. And maybe that's the point. God clearly spells out the message that he wants Jonah to walk away with, and the message he wants us to walk away with. Then he gives us a little something extra to chew on. So chew on it, and let me know what you come up with. Now, Jonah is a man of extreme emotions. Chapter 1, verse 3, he's defiant. 1 verse 9, he's proclaiming God's power and his fear of God. It's kind of opposite ends of the spectrum there. Chapter 2, praise and prayer toward God. Chapter 4, verse 1, he's angry and accusing God. Chapter 4, verse 3, it's better for me to die than to live. 3 verses later, he's exceedingly glad for the shade. 2 verses later, better to die than to live. He's just all over the map. This guy, one extreme to the other, just elated, and then we would even call that bipolar. He's just extremes in his emotions. It's very interesting man. Now, that's not all we get from these events in Jonah's life. Let's look at, in Luke 11, verse 29, we see the sign of Jonah. When the crowds were increasing, he began to say, talking about Jesus, "This generation is an evil generation," talking to the Jews. "It seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it, except the sign of Jonah." All right, what's the sign of Jonah? "For as Jonah became a sign to the people of Nineveh, so will the Son of Man be to this generation." So now he's comparing them to the evil Ninevites. You know, God sent Jonah to go speak to the evil Ninevites, and he sent me to go speak to you, evil people. He goes even further than that. "The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation." So all those dead guys in Nineveh, they're going to rise up at the same time as you at judgment. And they're going to condemn you. "For they repented at the preaching of Jonah," implying these people aren't repenting. "And behold, something greater than Jonah is here, and you still won't change." That's the sign of Jonah. So they are worse than the Ninevites, these evil, idol-worshiping Gentiles. And Jesus is really laying it on thick, because it's true. Those people at that time, those Jews, they were going to kill God's own Son. Matthew's account adds a little extra to this sign of Jonah. "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days, 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Matthew 12, verse 40. So we see that parallel. We've seen several parallels between Jonah and Jesus. Another takeaway. One, sacrificed for the many. Jonah knew he was the cause of the storm, and those on board might very well die because of him. He sacrificed himself for them. He took an active role when defying God, but now he's becoming repentant and passive, allowing God to do with him as he will. As Jesus was the lamb led to the slaughter by the Roman soldiers, Jonah is led to his death, or his perceived death, by the sailors. Because of Jonah's submission to God's plan, the lives of those on the ship are spared. Very similar to Jesus. Because of his sacrifice. Now, Jesus could have climbed up on that cross, nailed and killed himself. But that wasn't how it was. He was the lamb led to the slaughter. Quiet. He didn't fight against it. We see the same thing with Jonah. Once he realizes, okay, throw me overboard, it's in God's hands. So let's go back to that big application that God makes so clear at the end. Jonah saw them as enemies. We're the good guys and they're the bad guys. We're God's chosen and they're not. They don't worship God. Not only that, they worship false gods. They do evil things to each other. They're not special like we are. They deserve what they get. And I hope they get it. That was Jonah's view. Many Christians today may feel the same way about others in our country. They don't worship God. They do evil things to others and to us. They teach their children evil and try to lead our country down the wrong paths. Maybe we assume, well, they won't listen. I mean, with preachers on TV and on the internet, Bibles readily available here churches on every corner around here, they got plenty of opportunity to obey, they just won't listen. Maybe we look at their evil actions and view them as enemies, and would just prefer that God defeat them, destroy them. They've made their choice, I've made mine, let's see how it ends up. Sometimes we may take that attitude. The lesson that Jonah needed to learn is that he needed to be like God. God is merciful and is ready and even anxious to forgive. As in the parable of the prodigal son, he's standing at the door looking out at the horizon every day, waiting anxiously for his son to return. Jonah was full of hate, jealousy, and resentment. His attitude is like the older brother who was condemned in that parable. Did Jonah learn the lesson? We don't know. We're not told. It's just left unanswered for us. But there is a question we can answer. Did we learn the lesson? That's really what matters. Did we learn it? And while it is true that the evil of this world are enemies of God, and therefore enemies of us because we're His children, we're on God's side and they're on the opposite side. So that makes them our enemies. They don't have to stay that way. They can be forgiven. God told us to love our enemies, do good to them. God is merciful. Romans 5 reminds us that we too were enemies of God. Each and every one of us, at some point in our life, we were enemies of God and we needed God's redemption, His salvation. But we have been reconciled to Him by the death of His Son. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So let's go out and proclaim the coming destruction, because it is coming, in hopes that many will repent and be saved. Y'all can mill about, hang around, wait on the kids, whatever. Enjoy VBS.